Hi, I'm Kevin Vanetta, owner of Newberry Motors, and you're watching Yooper TV.
October 30th, 1920, was a gray and chilly day on the plains at West Point, New York, where three young men from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan will run onto Calumet Field along with their Notre Dame teammates to play the undefeated Golden Knights of Army. To the Eastern football establishment, the Fighting Irish, as they were starting to be known as, were still relative upstarts, that backwater school from South Bend, Indiana. George Gipp, Heartley Hunk Anderson, and Fred O.J. Larson attended the same high school in the Copper Country and were known as Coach Rockney's ski jumpers. Although Gipp's spotty attendance kept him ineligible from playing football, the trio would eventually unite on the gridiron at Notre Dame. Notre Dame would enter the game confident, riding a 13-game winning streak going back to an undefeated 1919 season. They had defeated a very good Nebraska team in Lincoln 2 weeks earlier and were about to give the cadets their first real test of the season. But for many in attendance, it was the match between Army's Walter French and Notre Dame's George Gipp to see who was the best back in the country. That morning, Hunk Anderson, along with an Army student manager, had met for breakfast and then proceeded to a shoemaker's shop just outside West Point in Highland Falls, where they gave a man with a heavy German accent just over $4,000 to hold in his safe on a winner-takes-all bet. Anderson had $60 of his own money on the line, with George Gipp contributing $400. The shoemaker asked Hunk if he was going to return for the money, and he confidently replied, "Don't worry, I'll be back." The game would have all of the attention the Eastern press could muster, led by the syndicated columnist Grantland Rice. The legendary Ring Lardner was also in attendance. He was an old Notre Dame fan, going back to his days as a Cub reporter working in South Bend. Lardner would later recall running into a confident Army assistant coach John McEwen and asking him square in the eye, "I hear Rockney is coming in again with that kid named Gipp." To which McEwen sarcastically replied, "Who the hell is Gipp?" To which Lardner coyly said, "You'll find out at about 10 minutes to 2 tomorrow." In attendance that day, having returned from World War I as that conflict's most decorated officer, was Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur, who had landed the coveted job of Superintendent of West Point Military Academy. MacArthur had seen Gipp play the previous season, and when Gipp was considering a transfer from Notre Dame in the summer of 1920, MacArthur would briefly look into the idea of bringing Gipp to play for Army, but nothing came of it. During pregame, General MacArthur and the capacity crowd of 10,000 were given a taste of what was to come, as Gipp went out to midfield and performed a feat he had done many times before. Gipp's drop-kicking ability was well known throughout the country. He had the equivalent of a viral moment in 1916 when he made a record drop kick of 61 yards during his freshman season at Western Michigan. The story ran in nearly every newspaper in the country. Now Gipp, in his best showman-like fashion, went out to the 50-yard line, turned to one goal post and kicked 2 balls straight through the uprights. He then turned and did the same to the opposite goal post. But the show, as they say, was just getting started. On Notre Dame's first possession, they began moving the ball well into Army territory, but then fumbled. The cadets would quickly take advantage of the turnover. On the very next play, Walter French, with his great speed, would beat everyone around the end for a 40-yard gain, setting up Army's first touchdown and an early 7-0 lead for the Golden Knights. On the next Notre Dame series, Gipp, after running for a first down, would come out of the pile with his friend Hunk Anderson punching at everything in sight. Gipp asked him what was wrong, and Hunk screamed, "That son of a bitch gave me the knee." Gipp tore off his helmet and lunged at the nearest cadets. After order was re-established, Gipp would connect on a long pass to wide receiver Roger Kiley down to the Army 5-yard line. 2 plays later, running back Johnny Mohart would take the ball over tackle to tie the game at 7. Early in the second quarter, Gipp ran back a Walter French punt 57 yards down to the Army 38. On 1st and 10, Gipp would perform his own version of play action by faking the run and dropping back to pass. He would again find the swift Roger Kiley, who got behind the Army defense, catching Gipp's pass in stride for the touchdown and a 14-7 lead after a Gipp extra point. Like any great battle of heavyweights, it was the Golden Knights' turn to strike back. Walter French dropped back to gather a Gipp punt. The diminutive dart thrilled the capacity crowd, weaving his way through the Irish for a 60-yard touchdown. The score was tied at 14. But French wasn't done. He would also kick a 15-yard field goal to give Army a 17-14 lead at halftime. It actually could have been much worse for the Irish. Late in the half, pinned deep in the Army end, Gipp was supposed to punt the ball away, but decided to gamble. He instead threw a long pass to Roger Kiley, who was wide open but inexplicably dropped the ball. "That was gambling," Coach Rockne would lament. "Absolute gambling. Notre Dame would somehow manage to dodge that bullet without giving up a score to the cadets." As the players were leaving the field at halftime, Grantland Rice turned to Ring Lardner and in praise of Gipp said, "He's really something special," to which Ring Lardner exclaimed, "I think he is just getting started." Being behind for the first time that season at the half made Notre Dame's fiery coach extra salty. Laying into the Irish, he noticed George Gipp over in the corner leisurely smoking a cigarette. "What about you, Gipp? You don't have any interest in this game?" Without batting an eyelash, Gipp shot back, "Look, Rock, I have $400 on this game and I'm not about to blow it." Ring Lardner's analysis had been prophetic. Gipp was even better in the second half. After a scoreless third quarter, Gipp would lead the Irish on 2 fourth-quarter scores, all highlighted by his exceptional runs and his 3-for-3 passing down the stretch. The Notre Dame defense held French and the cadets scoreless in the second half, and with a couple minutes left in the fourth quarter, Gipp came out of the game with a somewhat comfortable 10-point lead. The crowd of 10,000 had just witnessed a Gipp masterpiece, and over 60 years later, Roger Kiley, by this time a retired federal judge, recalled fondly what he witnessed that day. "I have never seen an athlete get the acclamation George received when he walked off the field that day. He was tired and pale, and his face was a little bloody, and the crowd at West Point stood up, although nobody applauded. It was thrilling, awed silence." Gipp, by the numbers that day, had rushed for 150 yards on 20 carries, an average of 7.5 yards per carry, going 5 of 9, passing for 123 yards for a total of 273. Adding another 112 yards on punts and kickoff returns would give Gipp an incredible 375 yards total offense. After the game, Hunk Anderson made his way to a certain shoemaker's shop to collect $4,200, the total amount bet by the Army and Notre Dame teams. Rockne was in a festive mood and decided that the team should go out on the town in Manhattan to celebrate. One can only imagine seeing 3 young men from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, flush with cadet money, out for a night in the Big Apple. What a way to celebrate a victory over the Army. One for the books. Years later in his biography, Coach Rockne would say of George Gipp, "I felt the thrill that comes to every coach when he knows it is his fate and his responsibility to handle unusual greatness, the perfect performer who comes rarely more than once in a generation."